Now, some people may be thinking, hold on, this is all very interesting from an antiquarian point of view, but the world has changed to the point that this aspect of our heritage simply doesn't matter anymore. History has stopped. Things have changed so much that the old need to be armed for protection against crime, against tyranny, and against invasion just doesn't apply in the modern world. And it's a comforting thing to think, but unfortunately, it's just not so. For one thing, crime is up so dramatically in the last 60 years that Steven Pinker has called this a process of decivilization. Now, the prospect of tyranny in Britain or Canada is vanishingly remote as things stand, and I hope it always will be. But hoping isn't the same thing as being prepared in case you're badly disappointed. And then there's this question of invasion. Again, you see, our national security we're so safe, nothing could happen. That's what the British government thought after they won World War I, and for the first time began regulating guns in Britain and slowly taking them away from the civilian populace. But then came Hitler and the looming menace of World War II. The memorial to the Battle of Britain, in which, as Winston Churchill said, never have so many owed so much to so few. These heroic airmen from Britain, from Canada, from Australia, from France, from Poland, and other countries managed to defeat the German Luftwaffe. In order to invade Britain, it was essential that the Germans control the English Channel and keep the Royal Navy out. To do that, they had to control the skies over southern Britain and the Channel. This, right by the Houses of Parliament, could have been the scene of the last desperate, bloody, and unsuccessful battles to save Britain from Nazi invasion, were it not for the victory celebrated on this memorial. And in the shadow of that horrifying prospect, the British government actually began distributing guns to the civilian population, so if the Germans did invade, it would be possible to resist. The King was practicing with a Tommy gun in case he had to join the underground. The Queen was practicing with a handgun. And the British government even ran ads in American publications, give a gun to defend a British home. And Americans did. Thousands of long guns, of pistols, of revolvers, of all kinds of weapons that would have permitted the British to fight in their own streets and neighborhoods if they'd had to do it against Hitler. It's sobering to be here at Battle Abbey, in the town later named Battle, the site of the pivotal victory at Hastings that made William of Normandy into William the Conqueror. And to imagine the British in those bleak days of late 1940 and 1941, gazing anxiously to the skies, looking for Luftwaffe bombers and fighters, or even the paratroops who had dropped with such suddenness on Norway and the Netherlands, or peering anxiously across the English Channel toward the French coast from which the last successful invasion of the British Isles had set out in 1066. It's even more sobering to imagine the state of the French in late 1940, conquered by Hitler and the Nazis, trying to mount a resistance without an armed populace because the government had never trusted its own citizens. And the French had been there before. In 1870, as they were losing the Franco-Prussian War, there were hopes that an irregular force of francs-tireurs could continue to resist even after the army had surrendered. But again, the French simply weren't armed sufficiently to do it. It's too late to get an armed citizenry when you need one. And the critical issue is governments trusting their citizens. As George Orwell would write about the British Home Guard in 1941, totalitarian states can do great things, but there's one thing they can't do. They can't give the working man a gun and tell him to take it home and keep it in his bedroom. And he said, that rifle hanging on the wall of the workman's flat or the laborer's cottage is a symbol of our democracy. It's our job to see to it that it stays there. Instead, as soon as the war was over, the British government rounded up the guns that had been given to the Home Guard and destroyed them. And in 1946, the Home Secretary said that self-defense would no longer be regarded as a suitable reason for getting a firearm certificate. How quickly we forget. Now, fortunately, the Battle of Britain was won. The invasion never happened. The Allies did win World War II. And again, we think we're safe. But if people are not a menace to themselves or their neighbors, if they possess the means of self-defense, is it really a sensible gamble to say that history has stopped and we will never again need these things, especially when this monument stands almost literally in the shadow of the home of British self-government, the Parliament buildings behind me? Another feature of the modern world that really deserves attention in this context is the threat of terrorism. Particularly as security forces get a little better at protecting the big, dramatic, hard targets, terrorist groups like ISIL are encouraging their members to run amok in the city streets, to drive cars onto sidewalks, to stab people. And those kind of tactics cannot be met with a police response in time to protect the lives of the innocent. Being in London, remembering 7/7, the bombings in the tube stations and on the buses, again, an attempt to wreak havoc among the civilian populace. When a situation like that develops, as the Israelis know all too well, the only solution is to have citizens able to respond immediately to the threat and neutralize it. So history hasn't stopped. That's one of the ways in which history hasn't stopped, and in which it is simply not safe to assume that we will no longer need to protect ourselves against a threat that appears too suddenly for the police to react.